A very warm welcome to Two Macs and a Dram with Hector Macbeth and myself, Guy McDonald. It's wonderful to be with you again. It's been a while, Hector. We've been sipping and laughing and trying to do business and all sorts of things in all over the place. But we're back together here with an opportunity for you to learn more about a fantastic homegrown product. And you may have seen social media around this. We always get very, very excited as a team when we encounter something from South Africa, a product that is certainly going to be making waves. And today, we're very lucky to have the MD of Sugarbird joining us, Matt Bresler. A very warm welcome to Two Macs and a Dram, sir.
Thanks very much. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, Matt, I would like to congratulate Sugarbird first as a brand. I mean, for me, one of the most exciting, I think you guys launched in 2017 and sort of unusually at the time, did so through crowdfunding. And suddenly the world knew about Sugarbird and specifically Fynbos gin. So that's kind of where you started out. And I thought the innovation was brilliant because immediately you had Christmas baubles and Christmas crackers and all sorts of things. And even Advent calendars, which no one had really done before that, guy. So you sort of just come on the scene and suddenly you've got all this paraphernalia to back you up.
Yes. And so, yeah, you're right. Toward the back end of 2017, we used the Thunder Fund platform to raise just over R1 million, which was actually the record at the time, which tells you how nascent, I guess, the South African crowdfunding market is. So we were quite pleased to have done as well as we did. And that helped a little bit with some working capital. We then needed to raise some more money, which we did through friends and family finance to get us enough working capital to be in the big retailers like Pick n Pay. We had started at Macro, and in fact, the original founder and I were at a meeting in Johannesburg with a buyer there in September of 2018, where she showed us a product from Pickering's, which is a Scottish gin, which was a gin bauble product that she'd been offered, as well as several other buyers in South Africa. And in fact, they obviously went to Australia and New Zealand at the same time because we saw that Christmas that those products were available in New Zealand and Australia. But the price point was just way too high for this country. And so what she had been asking several folk to do was to make a local equivalent of it at a price point that actually ended up being about a sixth of what she was offered for an imported Scottish product. We, being crazy, rose to the challenge and said, despite her colleague laughing because it was already September and we needed to get her product in October, we said, we'll rise to the challenge, which we were a bit crazy to do, but we ultimately prevailed. We had in this very warehouse quite 6, 7, 8, 9 all-nighters. We hired people, family, friends of the family, sort of people who worked at my house and colleagues of theirs, family of theirs. We probably, in the end, had about 40 or 50 different people working manually to fill, to cap, to glue gun caps onto baubles, so to make them, look like they ought to as a brand. And we launched that in that Christmas at Macro. We made 165,000 individual baubles, all hand sort of filled and ribboned and capped and the rest of it. And that really set us on a trajectory of being the solution people for Macro. We then did the same thing again for Macro the following year. 3 months after the original baubles, for which the buyer there won an innovation award and the rest, we did an eggs product for Pick n Pay over Easter, and we then did several Advent calendar products. So you get an opportunity on each of the days of Advent to choose a different craft gin with all of the famous guys, the normal guys that you'd expect there as the best South African craft gins. So you get value for variety. That was something that we did for Pick n Pay. As you mentioned, we did gin crackers where you get for a price point actually cheaper than a normal mini. You get a mini inside a cracker, which was certainly very popular with Checkers and ShopRite. And then we did, multi-brand sets of 5 because you're an independent retailer. You might want to sell those sorts of things. And so, yes, the innovation of packaging, innovation, particularly of collaborating with our competitors, which is, I think, unusual, is something that's done very well for us as a company. And effectively, we've created not only Sugarbird, but I think there's some brand equity in the Sugarbird and Friends concept where we've collaborated to say to the folk out there, they may be competitors of ours, but you might want to try them too. And these big bottles of 300-400 rand of a craft gin, maybe you get a chance to sample and then buy the one that you really want. So that did well for us.
Yeah, I find that quite fascinating, and I must applaud you for that, because I think that when you work in the industry, it is a real small industry, the spirits industry in South Africa. And it is amazing that, you know, when we sit down after big festivals or big shows, we all do come together, and because we all do share a passion at the end of the day, and that is producing high quality spirits. And it's the most amazing thing that you guys actually just went out and did. And I remember seeing it the first time and went, wow, that's pretty incredible that a newcomer just decided, you know what, you actually all get together, but we'll package you and make sure everyone knows you all get together. And I just absolutely love that concept of Sugarbird and Friends. So really well done on you guys for doing that. And yeah, it's just incredible to see that. And I see you have done the same now. You've decided to venture into brandy. You know, obviously 14 years ago, you weren't even thought of. So how did you manage to source such a high quality pot still brandy?
So we have, well, in fact, I'll start by pointing to the point you raised there about now venturing into brandy. And we did venture into brandy because of the desire to continue to showcase what South Africa has to offer. And I will admit, as someone who's not from the spirits game, that I didn't have as good a sense as I now have of just how incredible South African brandy heritage is. And as you guys will know, South Africa's won 15 of the last 20 best brandies on earth, competing out the French and the cognacs and the rest of it. And so quite incredible history and an incredible product. And in many ways, we would have actually, had we known, done a brandy showcase first, because it's more deserving of the showcase as a South African product than South African craft gin. There's much less of it around. And as you will know, the big guys, the Distills and the KWVs and the like, have been trying to promote craft brands actually playing in the space so as to reinvigorate what otherwise is a musty and somewhat wine estate driven industry that has incredible heritage and incredible quality, but doesn't quite have that sort of brand innovation that is definitely something that's been added by South African entrepreneurship, as well as, in my mind anyway, access to Fynbos botanicals to make South African craft gin what it is. So craft gin definitely deserves its showcase. What we have in this pack here, which is a pack of 12, which we actually got on shelf for the same price as the gin. We did a pack of 12 gins as well in 2019 over Festive. We did this in 2020 at the same price point, despite the value of the liquid in here being, I would say, approximately twice the value of the craft gins. And as an example, here's Groot Constantia's Mini. Now, Groot Constantia makes a single barrel product annually. It's made with Pinotage and Sauvignon Blanc, which is very unusual. And we took 75% of their full barrel and put it in these little minis, such that it's now available in retail for the first time ever. So the only time anyone who is a big Groot Constantia brandy aficionado could actually get it was to drive from, you know, Palaborva to the gate of Groot Constantia and go and get it at the cellar door. That's the only time you could ever do it. Now you could go to the, you know, to the local Pick and Pay or your local independent and get a sample of Groot Constantia's 5-year-old, which sells, by the way, for 900 Rand for a half bottle. So this is a proper liquid. And it, like many of the others in there, is effectively more cognac than a brandy. It's a real sipping product and a real quality piece. So we did that, and we show the bottles of what's in there at the back. This is available at Take a Lot, at Pick and Pay, at several other online retailers and some independents. It has sold less fast than gin because it's a smaller market, and it's, in fairness, a heritage product rather than a product you'd want to mix with Coca-Cola or ginger ale. But we feel delighted to have been able to help people educate themselves a little bit more. And like with the gin situation, where out of the 35 we tried, we only got 2 no's. We got all yeses from all of the people, including people like KWV, who you'd expect to drag the heels or be a bit more full of red tape. Unfortunately, KWV didn't feature in here because of a technicality that pertains to our company being in liquidation prior, and our food safety files being under lock and key. But it's actually as a consequence of that we were able to source a product for our own brandy with conversations with the bulk liquor seller of KWV, who's normally exporting what is a 14-year pure pot still product from KWV. We've made arrangements at pricing that a small craft brand like us can afford, for which we're very grateful to Cabernet V, to have enough liquid to last us the next several years, to provide a pure pot still product that's been matured in 340 litre barrels, with predominantly Chenin and Colombard, which is traditional for brandy. And what we do is we then take that product that has been removed from that 340 litre barrel after 14 years, such that the aging process is technically halted. And we actually drip filter it, so it's literally very gently handled through honeybush tea to add a bit of a Fynbos element to it, and we add a little bit of Cape Fynbos honey to enhance the complexity of the product. And that's with the person who helps with our gins, the sort of the R&D that we came up with to take a very heritage 14-year matured KWV product that otherwise goes to the export market and make a more price accessible XO. It actually technically could be called an XXO, but we didn't want to step on any toes with KWV, so we called it an XO, and we put it in what we think is an attractive bottle and a nice foiled Sugarbird-esque label. That's how we got into brandy.
And Matt, you mentioned just before we started recording that you have a great passion for botanicals and Fynbos. Where does that stem from? And how did you then decide, well, that's what you want to infuse this brandy with?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I have a science type background. It's microbiology, chemistry, bit of botany. I have, particularly on return to South Africa after a decent amount of time abroad, grown in my understanding of Fynbos, and I've put in probably 800 or 900 different species of Fynbos in the garden, just because I've wanted to have an example of almost everything I've seen. And so I've learned a great deal about Fynbos over the last 10 years. I had a passion for Fynbos prior to that related to silly things like collecting butterflies that, live in Fynbos and stuff like that as a schoolboy. And what I've always been very proud of is the biodiversity richness of the Cape Floral Kingdom, which, if you look at a map, you see a world map and you see this tiny little pink dot just around Cape Town, a little bit up the east coast and a tiny bit up the west coast. And that compares to floral kingdoms that go all the way across North America, Europe, and Asia. And that's, I think, number 2, whereas we're number 6 of a total of I think it's 6 or 7 globally. And the biodiversity is just insane. What that means is that even for people who are looking for medicinal, for flavor, for essential oils and the rest of it, Fynbos is very untapped, if you can believe it. And so what we've done is we've started with some of the more traditional things like buchu, which is well regarded for its range of flavor. And for example, a product called Agathosma betulina, which needs to be, or a buchu called Agathosma betulina, which needs to be harvested at a certain time of year to get certain isotopes right, adds an element of like black curranty flavor that is quite, it goes quite well in pairing with juniper, which itself is very piney and a fresh flavor, being a coniferous tree. Of course, it's not a juniper berry, it's a juniper cone. And so that was an obvious addition to our first gin, which is this little guy. And so his Fynbos hero, if you like, is Agathosma betulina. That's one that isn't uncommon to other people who make gin. We've then moved, as we went, for, in fact, a less Cape dry, which puts juniper a little bit backward to make space for the floral and citrus notes that we have in here, in addition to juniper, which come from rose geranium, which of course is a Fynbos plant, which most people don't recognize as a Fynbos plant because it's so famous worldwide. We then went for, in the purple, we went toward the revering of the juniper cone itself, and we went with a very dark color on purpose. It doesn't look particularly attractive in bottle, but it looks amazing in glass, because when diluted, it still looks a nice, deep, attractive purple, which is not true of the pink gins, which look nice in bottle, but a bit insipid glass. And so we're revering the juniper, but we also added 2 very important Fynbos elements, Cape Chamomile and Cape May. So several people would know Cape May. Cape Chamomile, which is an Erysophilus, is a wild rosemary. It, like chamomile tea, produces a deep blue in extract. and it adds some really interesting character, as well as the Cape May, which is a Coleonema, either album or pulchrum, depending on the flower color. But those add a very distinctive flavor to this product. It's a little bit different. It is London Dry style in it that it's very juniper forward, but those that like it love it, and they come back for it, and it's the only one that they want. So we were pleased with that too. And then our final flavor, that's a bottle flavor, we have 2 limited editions as well, is Pinotage and Pelargonium. And we actually needed to find an extra color to make the egg pack work so that we could have 3 pairs of colors. And so after having clear and purple, we eventually caved and went pink, which we were quite reluctant to do because of not having a good reason. And one morning I woke up, I think I was on my way to work when I had the realization, with most people not recognizing that rose geranium is a Fynbos plant. It doesn't actually look like Fynbos either, but it's all over Europe. It was used by the Brits to making rose water cheaper than using rose petals because the essence comes from the leaves. You get a lemon geranium, which we have in here, called Pelargonium crispum. There's also citronella, which is a lemon geranium. And you get another geranium or Pelargonium called Pelargonium pseudoides, the root tuber of which is used in traditional medicine to actually ward off bronchial diseases. So those 3 Pelargoniums are in here. And when it hit me that we could take a well-known and probably not known to actually be South African plant export, botanical export, like Pelargonium, which is a Fynbos plant, and 3 of them in this case, and pair that with another one that wouldn't strike you necessarily as South Africa's biggest plant export, because you don't quite think about it that way, which is Pinotage, because clearly that is one of South Africa's biggest exports of all time. And it is a grape varietal, but it's a plant export. And so along with, you'd argue, honeybush and Proteus themselves and rooibos, we've probably easily got 2 of the top 10 South African sort of plant exports, and things for which South Africa is famous in terms of its biodiversity. And we like the linkage of that in what's now called Pinot and Pelargonium quite affectionately by those who like it. And that's how we got the floral and citrus balance, both out of Pelargonium. And then, of course, we've got this element of color from red grape skins that come from Pinotage grapes.
Sure. I must say, Hector, I think this is the first time I've met somebody that has as scientific approach to liquor as you do. And this is so rewarding to listen to you speak, Matt, because you and Hector both have this wonderful scientific background when it comes to explaining these things. So that is absolutely fascinating. And it also reminds me of something that I saw on social media a week or 2 ago, where it was in the wine tasting sphere, where somebody was complaining almost and saying, how do we explain to the world what Fynbos is on the nose? And my answer to that was, you tell them Cape Floral Kingdom. And if they don't know what that is, they need to get on a plane and come here.
Yeah, and just, I mean, even just do the research. I mean, it is quite remarkable. It's funny, as a child, when I was collecting those butterflies I mentioned, I was always thinking of these big Amazonian butterflies that one has to go to Durban to go and get. And in fact, my grandfather offered for me to do that over a holiday because I had an insect project for school. And then when I met some of the real experts, they said, you don't know what you're missing in terms of the biodiversity of butterflies within Fynbos. They're just smaller, and they're just, they're less sort of Amazonian and tropical and impressive. And since then, I've become someone who's really appreciated what, as they say, is the fyn. It's a fine bush, incredible diversity. You just need to look a bit harder, and you sometimes need to use a microscope to understand it. We've added, obviously, because it's the obvious one to add, we've added in this limited edition, which is Protea and Cucumber, we've added Protea cynaroides. Now, cynaroides is the king Protea, and it's the one that's obviously the most famous. Unfortunately, Protea doesn't give a great deal in terms of flavor profile, but there are a couple out there that add a bit of mustiness, which I'm quite excited about trying with products like a brandy and a rum. And then we have Honeybush and Moringa, which is another limited edition. And in fact, we, for an export order, have just come up with a new gin, which is going to be one of 6 crackers that we're putting out there, with the 5 I've mentioned being the other 5. And that's called Cape Holly and Wild Plum. And those are both Cape trees. So, and they're edible, unlike holly, which from the holly tree, which is, well, from the holly plant, so it's not a tree, overseas, which isn't good for you. Both of those are edible. They're Cape trees, and again, it talks to our Cape heritage and the biodiversity that we can get. And in the case of the wild plum, you've probably seen millions of them along the road, and they're quite good street trees, actually. But so we're making a gin out of that for a Christmas launch, so that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that is quite exciting. Just to go a little bit back to process here, and lemon is one of my favorite, the Pelargoniums. I just absolutely love it. We find that quite a lot in hand scent. Now, the biggest problem with most sort of local botanicals is, as an infusion, they really add to those beautiful aromas, but most of them distill quite sort of bitter. So how are you guys getting that freshness in? Are you distilling it in, or are you infusing the flavor profiles into your gins? And then, because you say you're drip feeding the Sugarbird, so that seems like infusion. And back to your gins, are you distilling the botanicals in, or are you infusing them?
We're doing both. We do distillation with the, I would call it, traditional gin ingredients. So the ones that everyone would know, the grains of paradise and the angelica root and the cardamom and the coriander, and of course, juniper. What we then have is we effectively have a gin base of our liking, and we then add botanicals that range from tinctures to, in some cases, actually oils, which is sometimes problematic in terms of miscibility. But if you're doing things like Agathosma betulina at such trace amounts because of the concentration of the oil, you can actually get away with that, and that's no problem. And then we're also doing some distillation at people that we find up in Riebeck, Castile, who are doing harvesting there and then distilling things like the Pelargonium crispum or citronella. So we actually use Pelargonium crispum. Citronella also works. And they are harvesting biomass, and then they are doing a distillation process for us and effectively bringing us a tincture or an essence or a concentrate, if you like. And we keep that for a certain amount of time. We keep that at 4 degrees, and then we're using that to do, well, obviously our original R&D, and then we're making sure that we add it at elements such that we're then matching it to a standard at the time of the making of every batch. We're actually doing some interesting work on a gas chromatograph where we actually are looking at different times of harvesting of particular products and making sure that the appropriate esters and so on that we are looking for actually come out in the similar concentration. We actually haven't yet seen the result of it, but we want to make sure that there isn't, as there is with Agathosma betulina, a necessity to harvest at a particular time of year. If that's the case, we need to find some ways of storing longer term so as to match our taste profile absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. You mentioned rum. So is there R&D at the moment going on with some rum? Can we expect a Sugarbird, Sugar Baron rum type vibe coming to us our way soon?
You can. I will admit that we actually haven't progressed some of the R&D that we started. It could be 8 months ago for the last 3 months because we've been focused on getting ready for festive. We have pitched a few ideas to people that include a rum, and those ideas have actually been multi-brand mini products. And I will admit that we, which I think is appropriate, but for those who particularly like to sort of, stomp on juniper berries or juniper cones with their bare feet, it's a little bit frustrating to be led by the market. We all thought for a long time that craft rum was going to be the next big thing. There's been elements of that. It now looks like agave, spirits being both, a tequila type product, and a mezcal, on the up, and we've certainly done some of that. The short answer to the question is we have prepared ourselves so as to be able to come up with a rum, but we are timing that either with interest from someone who wants one of our bespoke products to include a rum, or with an appropriate timing in terms of our own sort of brand strategy for when the right time is to come out with a rum. And we are also looking at a rebrand of the Sugarbird label, which is another thing that we need to fit in at some stage, probably after festive this year.
There we go. Just that's fantastic news, and I look forward to. I'm very happy, Guy, and I will volunteer to be on your sample desk when all the rums arrive. We're quite good at sampling stuff.
Very good.
The notes get a bit weary towards the end, but I'm sure we can make a plan.
Cool. And we've actually had it's been wonderful. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we had incredible support on the brandy side, and people like Donald Pretorius, who's part of the Cape Brandy Guild, and at Odom Will, and we've just had really great support from people who know so much more than we could even dream of knowing about an industry. And people like Winnie Bowman on the brandy side, who's been a great support, and she was texting us over the weekend. In fact, I think she was doing some tasting of our product at the Platters Guide, and she was, she's on sort of WhatsApp contact with our marketing director, Phil. And so we're very grateful for what seems to be a response to young entrepreneurial small companies who are, trying to learn things, trying to do their best, and so on. So we've been delighted by the several elements of the industry in addition to our competing brands, and how everyone has been very keen to help. So
well done. And if I may, because I know you've got other things to get to as well, can we plunge into a tasting of this beautiful amber liquid? I have been dying to try this, and I've been holding out for this interview.
Okay.
The first thing that captures my imagination, which I must say, is I used to drink quite a bit of honeybush tea, and I went off it a little bit. I think the scent just kind of got to me, but I don't pick that up in an overwhelming way on this nose, which is very nice. It's everything is layered perfectly by my nose. So well done on that, because I think if people have had honeybush tea and maybe they didn't like it and they read that on the label, they might be put off. But I'd like to say here categorically that it certainly is not going to overwhelm you. Don't be put off.
Yeah. And so I did want to add at probably every point that we've been blessed with a real genius as a sort of a distiller blender who's across the road, as I mentioned. When we talk about that R&D, Edmund Paulson and I, Edmund worked at Gilbey's for 20 years. He has a very relaxed, flexible setup which suits us, and he is an absolute genius when it comes to alcohol and to flavor notes and what one can do. And he's often able to tell if there's a particular thing that we want to achieve it. He's able to tell how we achieve that, sometimes with some quite unique ways of doing it. And then, as you can tell from my craziness, I'm also throwing problems at him, like how do you make wild plum with Cape Holly? How do you make that accessible in a gin? How is that then going to mix with the juniper? What are we going to do in terms of color profile to try and match it to that of the wild plum berry? And he takes that stuff on board, and he tinkers away, and I sort of just let him be. And I come back, and suddenly there's this nice red looking liquid that gives you a sense of the tartness of plum, while at the same time still being a gin. So in terms of the honeybush, he would have spent a lot of time working out how to trickle feed over what sort of concentration, if you like, or thickness of bed of honeybush tea. We actually source ours from Mossel Bay, and we've used it in the honeybush and moringa gin as well. So Edmund knows the product, he knows what to expect. And we wanted to add that Fynbos element to it. And then we also add a Cape Fynbos honey. And in fact, I'm thinking of putting up an apiary so that we can make that come from our own Fynbos garden, which would be nice, despite the fact that I don't live out on a farm in the Karoo. And I'm close enough to here in Deep River. But that'd be a nice thing to do. And it's the sort of thing that one, it makes what we do intriguing, and fun. We've even talked about actually taking the product, which, as you guys know, we're very proud of being from KWV. That they're legally not allowed for us to publish that on the label, but an absolutely fantastic product that they've put together as a commensurate producer and multi-award winner, we're actually thinking of going down the route of putting it back in barrel, not so as to necessarily get it to a 15-year, although that will technically allow us to do it, but just so that we can learn a little bit more about a category. It would just be a very cool thing to be able to do. So we're considering doing that.
I must say it's a fascinating nose on it. It's exceptionally fresh, so you're getting a lovely sort of estuary note coming through, which is typical when you're adding botanicals to something to sort of get that sort of fresh lightness. What oak is it? Is it American oak?
No, it's French. It's French.
French limousine casks. Okay.
Yeah, so it's second and third full red wine, French oak. And it's been in those 340s for the entire 14-year, because with the change in legislation, one can't move to 1,000 litres anymore.
Sure.
And so, well, we particularly like the fact that it's been in those same barrels for as long as that.
No, absolutely. And I mean, 340 litres is a brilliant size as well. It's interesting because normally French oak's going to give it that sort of rancio effect, but I think obviously the honey and the and obviously the botanicals have lightened that load up, because it can be a bit heavy and musty on the nose, which puts a lot of people off. But I think that's what makes this so enticing and fresh. It's like really invites you in with its sort of lightness and crisp notes on it. And then on the palate, it's nice and refined, but a beautiful, soft, sweet finish. So really, so easy to drink. You know, and I think for me, the kind of step brandy's been missing over the last sort of decade is that fact of understanding that as much as we have some of the world's very best brandies, you still need to be approachable. And there's a time and place for everything. And this is absolutely brilliant. But I still don't understand the price point. How on earth you can produce something of this quality at that price point? That's incredible. A 14-year-old brandy.
So the reason is, I think, embarrassing and quite simple. I earlier alluded, and I need to be a bit careful about what I say, but I earlier alluded to a conversation with the marketing director. Sorry, I didn't allude to it. I'm going to talk about it now. I, as someone who didn't quite understand the South African legislations in their fulsomeness, wanted to understand, when going through the process of naming our product, whether we could call it an XXO. And the reason that I wanted to know that was that it's clear in French regulation that once one has got to 14 years old, one is able to call one's product an XXO. It seemed clear to me also that there wasn't an XXO in this country. And so what I did, because they'd been very helpful to us, and in fact, all of the staff were disappointed that they weren't able to get their 12-year-old into our box for reasons that I mentioned earlier, I phoned Nuno, and had the chat with him and just said, look, it isn't particularly clear to me in terms of South African regulations, but given that we're 14 years, would we be allowed to name our product XXO? And the answer was, well, actually you would, but it was a bit of a muffled, when are you intending to do this type conversation. And what we realized is that we had stumbled across a marketing and brand plan of KWV's itself, not for our product, but for a product that would then be marketed at an XXO price point, which would be substantially higher than ours by a long way. And the truth is that KWV has a brand equity that it can do that. And Sugarbird, particularly as a brandy producer, just doesn't. And so we had the benefit of some very kind contracting and pricing from KWV, partly because of all of the work that we did with them for them to potentially be in our box. And we are therefore wanting, despite the cost of label and bottle and the rest of it and labor, to make relatively low margin, but have the price point be accessible such that people might try it. Because to be honest, if we were at 800 Rand, 900 Rand, which one certainly could argue one could be at, with the brand equity that we have as a brandy, we're just not going to sell. And that's the short answer.
I think it's got a wonderfully smooth palate, and I'd be interested to hear from you, Hector, if you think that this could pass off in a blind whiskey tasting and confuse a couple of people, because it certainly doesn't. Yeah. Have you caught a few people out like that? They thought it's a whiskey?
We haven't, but we have had many people. I don't think they were caught out, but many people said it sips like a whiskey. It sips like a malt. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll take it one step further. It's got a very interesting apple note. I reckon if I was to stick this in a Calvados tasting, with all the French elite gathered, I think they'd be sort of panicky and worried that brandy was coming after Calvados. It's just amazing how it's got the sort of fresh apple note inside it. And of course, Calvados, they pretty much own that category, but with a brandy that tastes like that, I think we would scare them.
Yeah, it's always nice to scare the French.
They love being scared by South African brandy.
Yeah.
Matt, Bresler, we appreciate your time and we wish you all the best of luck and success. We can't wait to see what else comes out of your innovative offices. And thank you very much for sharing this brandy with us in particular. We really appreciate it. Of course, we now get an opportunity to give you a bottle of this for your tasting. All you have to do is answer the easy question on the Facebook page, and let's see if we could make you a winner. But that's 2 Macs and a Dram for today. Brought to you by Macbeth on Whiskey. And of course, until we see you again, I've lost my glass, Hector. There it is. Until we see you again, Matt, we say...
Slán